First thing I need to inform you and all Victorians of is that we are declaring a state of emergency in Victoria under the Public Health and Wellbeing Act. That state of emergency will be effective from 12 noon today and will run for 4 weeks. It is likely that that state of emergency will be extended and will be in place for as long as it needs to be. The other point to make is that that state of emergency, the provisions, the orders that are made as part of that will almost certainly change. We will try and minimise those changes so that we can have as much consistency, as much certainty for people who are impacted. But just as advice and response in bushfires changes, so too it will change in this COVID-19 emergency as well. We will be happy to take any and all of your questions in just a moment, but I just want to go through the main features of the state of emergency as declared today. You'll all be aware that the Prime Minister, with the full support of the National Cabinet following yesterday's meeting, has put in place mandatory quarantine for returned travellers. It is up to us as states and territories to give effect to that. So under the state of emergency that has been declared, it is an offence under the Public Health and Wellbeing Act to not comply with the orders that have been made. And those orders in the first instance relate to that mandatory, it's not optional in any way, mandatory home quarantine or at a hotel if you were not a resident. Now, that is a proportionate and appropriate response. We cannot be certain, given how much this virus has run in the US, in parts of Europe, in many other parts of the world. The status of those people returning is most uncertain, and in order to limit the spread of this virus, that is an appropriate response. Brett will speak a little bit more about these powers, all of them, and how they'll work in just a moment. The second part of yesterday's discussion, indeed this was a key feature of Friday's discussion at COAG in Sydney, was banning non-essential larger gatherings, gatherings of over 500 people, those that are not essential. Now, there are a whole range of gatherings that will be more than 500 that are in fact permitted. Things like public transport, where people are moving through, say, Fed Square on the way to somewhere else, workplaces, the list goes on, and Brett can speak to that in a moment. What we're talking about here is sporting events, cultural events, events that a club or an association might run, all of which are not essential. Big conventions, for instance, at the Melbourne Convention Centre or other similar venues. If they are over 500 people and they are not essential, and there are clear definitions about that, then they are not to go ahead. There are significant penalties for event organisers who fail to comply with that order. There are significant penalties across the board when it comes to these orders made under the Public Health and Wellbeing Act and under a state of emergency.